Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. We're glad that you've tuned in. A few things we wanted to tell you at the beginning of the show, and that's this podcast was created to be a tool to help you, primarily to discover and grow your EQ. Science and our own lived experiences confirm that the better we are at managing our emotions, the better we're going to be at making decisions, which leads to a better life. And that's something we all want. We're glad that you've taken out the time today to listen and hope that something that you hear will lead to a breakthrough. Hey, one last thing. We'd really appreciate a review on whichever platform you use to listen. And if you want to, leave some comments about what you heard today, as well as follow and subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode as we continue this journey. And with that, the show begins. With me, as always, is Jeff East with the Spirit of EQ. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Doing fine. And how's everybody out there listening?
Hey, today we're going to be talking about harnessing your emotional horsepower. Now, as many of the audience know, Jeff, you and I have multiple conversations in between recordings. So I had the opportunity to explore a little bit about what this is, where you're going with it, but emotional horsepower. So I'm going to ask you to pull out your inner geek and Motorhead. And I thought about this before we started recording today. It's like, wow, Motorhead is actually a compliment. And then I thought, wait a minute, there's another musical reference. But we won't get into Motorhead, the band. At least I don't think we're going to.
Well,
all right.
Ace of Spades is always a good song.
Okay, so mark it. Ace of Spades, everyone.
And we've lost Lenny, too.
Okay. All right, Jeff, for the audience, open it up a little bit about what is emotional horsepower?
Well, to me, emotional horsepower is the amount of emotional energy and drive and everything like that that you can have to deal with things that are coming at you in your regular life. And what really started this is I saw a reference in a book or something that I was reading, and it reminded me of something that I remember learning a long, long time ago, talking about cars and things, and it's called rolling horsepower.
I was going to ask you about that because in our before recording and stuff, that was the one thing that kind of, and I'm not a Motorhead, so some of this is like education for me. So yeah, talk a bit more about the rolling horsepower idea.
I think, excuse me, I think they call it something different now, but what it was when I first learned about it is you take a car and you get it going at a set speed, say 60 miles an hour, and you have the ideal condition is a perfectly flat road, no wind, and you get it up to 60 miles an hour, and then you put it in neutral and let it coast. And they would attach equipment to it to measure how fast it slowed down. And doing a whole bunch of maths that I don't understand, that will tell you how many horsepower it takes to have that car moving at a steady 60 miles an hour under those conditions. And it's kind of surprising if you would take, say, a full-size sedan,
right,
and do that. It only takes 60, 70 horsepower to keep it going at that steady speed. And, most modern cars, like the car I have, which is a full-size sedan, has about 300 horsepower available. But it only takes that 60 or 70 horsepower to keep it moving.
That's something that you mentioned that, Jeff, because I've always wondered about that, because that typically, at least in my mind, that seems to be part of the advertising and marketing. They'll, especially with muscle cars, right? There's always this indication of how much horsepower does it have. And when you hear that big number, I think 300's big, but I guess if you went into like Corvette world, that's what, like 700 or 800?
Or the Challenger Hellcats and things like that.
Okay. But how fast would you have to be going to get to the maximum horsepower, though? Am I tracking there?
That horsepower is not just at top end. That horsepower is used to make a change in your velocity. Like if you're at 0 and you only gave it 60 or 70 horsepower from your engine, you would eventually get up to 60, but it would take you a long, long time, and you'd be causing massive amounts of road rage.
Right.
Okay,
right.
So you use that extra horsepower to get up to speed.
Right.
And then as you're going down the road, you encounter a headwind. You have to push down on the accelerator a little bit more, and you're going to need more horsepower, 10, 20 horsepower.
So would you consider this almost like a fuel bank, if you will? Not a fuel bank, but an energy bank.
An energy bank, yes.
Right? Because you're calling on it depending on the situation that you're in. If you're facing a lot of wind, you need more horsepower. If you're going up a hill, right? Or something?
Yeah, so that's what that is, and it takes into account some things you don't think about: aerodynamics, the wind. It takes into account the friction in the wheel bearings.
Okay.
And then it also takes into account that friction or resistance that is built up in the tires.
And this is all kind of in that design engineering phase when they built the car, right?
Right. The engineers, like I said, that know math better than I do, take that all into consideration, and they'll have a pretty good idea of what that is before they even build the car.
Okay.
So, but then they will need to consider, in this case, what is the car going to be used for? If it's your, Econo box that you drive back and forth to work, it maybe only needs 100 horsepower.
Got it.
But if you sell it to somebody that wants performance, then it's going to need that 300 or 400 horsepower.
Okay. All right. So before any of our audience out there thinks that they've tuned into the wrong podcast.
Yeah, this is not car talk.
Right? But that's great. That's great education for me and hopefully for those of you out in the audience. So Jeff, how does this relate to EQ?
All right. So I'm going to go back again. And if you don't know what an Olds Vista Cruiser is, you might want to Google it for an image.
Okay.
It was an Oldsmobile station wagon, the huge boat. Okay.
All right.
And if you remember, they had a little window across the top, kind of.
Now, keeping in mind, Jeff, many of our audience, they won't remember.
That's why
there will be no reference. So you did say Google.
Just Google the image of an old Vista Cruiser.
Okay, all right.
And you had the front seat.
Yep.
And you had the middle seat.
Yep.
And then you had the way back.
The way back. Now,
okay.
Okay, you got to educate me on that. What was the way back?
These are for the little kids and the dog. Okay, it was a seat in the back that you would fold up out of the station wagon part. It folded up so you're facing backwards, looking out the back window. So you had these seats in there.
Oh my gosh! All right, so
just imagine that car.
Okay, I got it in my head.
So you're driving down the road, and let's say that car needs 70 horsepower to go at 60, and you're in the car by yourself.
Right.
And the motor's running perfectly. There's no wind. You're on perfectly level road. And no extra things. So then life starts happening. So you get a family. So you put the family in there. Family weighs some. So they're going to make the resistance higher. So you're going to need some more horsepower with your family in the car, which is your life. Okay. Then you've got that guy at work that drives you nuts. You add another way back. So you got a way back. And he's back there, and then your neighbor that drives you nuts, and these people that are making you.
Now, would that equate also to life events?
Life events, that would be baggage.
Which might be loaded into the car.
Well, in this case, if you Google that picture, they have it a roof rack.
Okay.
So if you ever saw a family on vacation with one of those cars, it would be piled up.
Because that's where you put your luggage.
Suitcase and tents and all that stuff. So let's say you had some baggage happen. You might have lost your job. So you pile some baggage on top. That's going to give you more wind resistance. That's going to give more work for the tires to do.
Yeah.
And you just keep having those things happen, these different kind of baggage happening. And so you're using more and more of that horsepower. In this case with the car horsepower, but you're using this emotional horsepower that you have. Right. More and more of it's getting used up. Then you hit a major thing. A divorce or a death of a close family member, and that would be like a steep hill until finally you keep adding these things to your car or to your emotional life, and you're finally going to get to the point where you don't have enough horsepower to get up that hill. And that's when things start happening. And another thing to think about is you started this whole trip off with a perfectly functioning engine. The more stress you put on that engine, the more chance it is it's going to break down. Instead of a big humming V8, all of a sudden 2 cylinders aren't working. So you don't have as much horsepower to begin with.
Yeah.
And that could be personal issues that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
That can affect that.
So Jeff, when I think about it, we've thrown out the definition to EQ many times in this show. You know, the idea that managing what I think and what I feel to make optimal decisions, right? There's nothing in there that talks about manage events of life.
No.
Because let's face it, there are many people that get divorced that never thought they would get divorced. Everybody knows we're going to die, but nobody knows when. Nobody, it's not something you can say, oh, and it's, 2021 and this is going to happen, right? All those things are catalysts, right? Because I've got this image in my head of this vehicle now, and I've got all that stuff, and I think we accumulate those things over time, right? And where I'm going with that is, there certainly has to be a point, and I guess I'm going to stay with the road idea of where I've got to pull off to a rest stop and evaluate what is it that I have in the car and what I have on top of it.
Exactly.
Is that tracking?
Yeah, it really is, because you realize that, you're not going the speed you want to go with your life. Your emotional speed, like we talked about. And you get to the point where you're smashing down on that accelerator in your car, your emotional accelerator, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And nothing's happening. Your foot's to the floor, and you just get to the point where you have to pull over, or the car may just stop and you don't have a choice.
Right. It makes the decision for you. So along that path and that journey, your emotions are communicating with you. I would imagine with so much in the car and so much on top of the car and the car not responding with the horsepower that you want, things like feeling frustrated, feeling anger, fear, all those different emotions, just to name a few, are there. And as we've talked about, they're not there to make life worse. They're there to communicate something for your benefit, right? So that could possibly be that, hey, the reason why you're feeling frustrated is you need to pull over to the side of the road and just take a really hard look at what and where you're at, right?
Exactly. And one of the things you might have to figure out is, okay, I may have to only go 40 miles an hour for a while until I can get things handled. I just can't push it like that.
Yeah.
So I may have to take some things out of my life. I may have to, like you said, reevaluate.
Why do you think that's so hard for people to? I mean, because I've encountered folks when I say to them, you don't have to take the entire chunk. You could just, and you used it from the perspective of you can go at a different speed. Is that, do you think, part of this because our culture values performance and winning?
Yes. If you slow down, you can't be first.
Oh, wow.
If people are going to pass me now. People are going to look down at that loser.
Because you had to pull off to the side of the road.
Or had to just slow down.
You had to slow down.
I mean, if you look at a race car.
But you know what, Jeff?
Okay.
I'm sorry. And let's come back to the race car, but I got to say something within that. How many of the people that would think that we're losers or would feel that we're less than, how many of those people actually really even give a rip about you? I mean, truly care,
Okay, I had to make a decision in my old job. I was on the road all the time. And I dealt with being upset with people. If somebody passed me on the freeway, I couldn't let that happen.
I can't see that, Jeff, in you. So that was another Jeff?
And then I realized, it's not a race unless the other person knows we're in a race.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
yeah,
who cares now?
Right. So I took you off of the path there. You were going to talk about race cars.
Well, even a high-performance race car, they have to pull in and do service during a race. There's a pit stop. Yeah, so, maybe we don't want to say pit stop because hopefully we're not racing down the road.
Right.
You pull into a rest area.
Yeah.
and take a chance to do that, and go through that pile of luggage and see what's important, what's not. Go through. Maybe even in your family. I'm not saying get rid of your family. That's not what I'm saying. But evaluate your relationships in the family and see where can I make these relationships better. Because they're your family, so you like I said, you don't want to get rid of them. But how can I make it better? Maybe having empathy for someone can make it better. That person, your next door neighbor that drives you nuts, have some empathy for them.
Yeah.
So you can start using those kind of things to lessen that load.
So, Jeff, do you believe, and I'm going to reference this from my own personal experience, I encountered a major level of burnout about 5 years ago when I had this laundry list of things that I thought I was responsible for. And, of course, they were things that I created in my own head. Not to mention the fact that I had a Superman complex to add to that. And one of the things that my therapist said to me in a session was, tell me about what it is you feel you're responsible for. And he asked that question. And I said, well, I have to do this and I have to. And he stopped me right in the middle of my second, I have to. And then he said, tell me really, what is it that you have to do? Let's just look at the list of what is the have to. And I felt so exposed because I realized of the 15, 20 things I had on my list, there was really about 4 or 5 that were actually my responsibility. Like I could legitimately say, you know what? Call Eric when this goes south, or call Eric when you need help. Not the other 10 things. But I had done that. It was, the neural pathway of just over time, I need to be. So for some, and Jeff, I would dare say if I were listening to this, 5 years ago, this would have made me recoil to hear what you just said, because it's the idea that I've got to pare down or pare away. What do you say to those folks that maybe are in that position that say, well, you don't understand, I have to?
Well, let's talk about EQ. Okay,
right.
I told you we'd get around to this. People.
Yeah,
they need to examine what they're feeling. What is driving me? What is making me feel that I have to do that? I have this emotion that I have to do that. Well, examine it. The emotional
sit with it a while.
Sit with it a while. That emotional literacy that we've talked about before, which is our first competency.
Right.
That
what is it saying? What is it trying to communicate to you? And I would say, Jeff, and for everyone out there, it's not like you're sitting there waiting for the heavens to open up and a sign to be written in the sky. You may have to sit with it. When I say a while, I mean it's not just 5 minutes now. It's probably 5 minutes now, 10 minutes tomorrow, a half hour the next day, whatever, right?
Right.
It's not an immediate, this is what I'm feeling, this is what it means.
Yeah, you that examine it and see where it's leading you.
And everybody's different. I want to stress that. I understand. I mean, some people it's slower, some people it's faster. I get that.
I mean, emotional intelligence is your emotional intelligence, not mine or Eric's.
Yeah, very well said.
Look at what patterns. I always do this. I always pile that baggage on top of my car. Why? I don't need that for the trip I'm on right now. I don't need to pile on a mistake I made 10 years ago that is still bothering me, that maybe held me back. So unstrap it and leave it at home or wherever you want to put it. So think about that. What am I always doing? Why am I always doing these things? And we can go down the list. What is motivating me? Why do I think I have to continue this speed with all this stuff on me? What is my motivation? Is it my motivation or is it outside motivation?
Well, and again, I'm going to speak from my own personal, I know the idea of paring that list down meant that I was going to disappoint some people because some people, And I know we'll talk about this more in future episodes. This idea about persona, and I'll never forget. I talked about it probably on a previous show as well. That's the beauty, Jeff, of having so many shows that we've done. So, and that's from Jim Carrey, and he was in this interview I was watching. He was talking about he had spent so much time building this persona, and it wasn't him.
Mm-hmm.
But he built it. It was everyone, that's who they associated him to be. And he said the process of unwinding, and I don't know if he necessarily said it exactly like this, but it was almost communicating him trying to say, whoa, that's not, and then he realizes, oh my gosh, I got to basically say I'm a fraud here.
Mm-hmm.
Because I created this persona, and that persona is truly not me, and I'm trying to unwind it to be the person that I really am.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of daunting when you think about, well, wait a minute, these people on my list, I gave them the impression that I was Superman, but now I'm going to tell them, no, I'm not. That's I know you can't solve that. So
right.
Believe me in that. I know that, so I don't want to put that weight on you, but is there something you can say to that person who's afraid that, oh my gosh, I'm going to disappoint this person when I tell them or when I, whatever.
Okay, we're going to do another competency.
All right, I love it.
Consequential thinking. What is the consequences of me disappointing that person? And like you said earlier, they may not even know that you think you have to do something for them. It's assumed. And if you don't do what you said you're going to do, they might not even notice. But see the consequences of the action of disappointing that person. If it's somebody that you know really well and you can explain it to, the consequences might not even be near what you think they are, if they really are on your side, if they really care about you. So, those consequences. And I think another thing that you need to really think about in this is empathy for yourself, to remember that, like you've been saying, you're not Superman.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Yeah.
Superman's fictional.
Yeah.
It's not real.
Yeah. So I want to take you back. You mentioned the consequences with the people, the person that you love or care about. There also is a benefit, I think, Jeff, that comes with that. Hey, I need to have a conversation with you about whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit is certainly it's a breakthrough for you to move forward in a more healthy way. It's also a benefit to them in that eventually, Jeff, if you don't have enough horsepower, but you keep pressing and you keep pushing, eventually what happens?
You break down on the side of the road, right. And you're no good to anyone then.
Yeah.
You're going to look at yourself as a failure. You're going to disappoint these people that were counting on you with no warning. Usually,
that's a great observation there, and I can tell you, I did disappoint some people, and I did leave some people kind of scratching their heads, like, well, why? I had to hold on real tightly to a future benefit that at some point down the road, it's going to make more sense to them and they're going to be the better for it. They may not understand just how close I was to a total breakdown on the side of the road, which would have been infinitely worse. But even though it was kind of painful, it kind of helped me understand that's why you got to believe in the benefit of the future forward.
Exactly that. Yeah. Consequential thinking, almost all these things. And then I think another competency is the noble goal part. Mm-hmm. What do you want people to remember? Do you want people to remember you laboring down the road, trying to keep up the speed and your hair on fire?
Yeah.
Or do they want to remember the person that had time for them, that had time to pay attention, to care for them? Because if you're in that point where you've used all your horsepower up, your emotional horsepower, you're not going to be able to do that for anyone. The best you could do is that, pat on the head and say, I'm sorry. That doesn't mean anything. But you don't have any capacity to really care about someone else.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So, any other correlations between our emotional health and the car stuff?
No, I think that's a good bit of it.
Yeah.
Just remember, cars have gauges.
We didn't touch on that. Yeah.
Pay attention to those gauges. They'll tell you if you're starting to overheat or if you're using too much fuel. All of a sudden, your tank is almost empty.
Yeah.
So just pay attention to those kind of things.
That's a really, really powerful, it was multiple pronged advice. Pay attention to your gauges.
Mm-hmm.
And warning lights, right?
Gauges, warning lights. Listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you see smoke starting to come out of the back, pay attention to what's happening around you.
Yeah, and I know we live in an age, right, where some equate this, sitting with your emotions, becoming more literate with your emotions, as being soft and flowery, and you sit in a corner and cross your legs and meditate. And for some people, maybe that is what they do. But I think for us, Jeff, we're talking about this is practical, actionable stuff you're doing consistently. It's a flow, right?
It's a flow, and if you get serious about it, it's hard. It's not easy. They call these things soft skills, and that just drives me nuts because these are the hard skills.
Yeah.
To learn to do these things. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, but it's infinite the value that you get from it.
Yeah, and I think in these times that we're in, the pandemic era, if you will, it is vitally important to be intentional to a level of saying, hey, I have to take time to evaluate and to sit with and to probe deeper because I saw a warning light come on my dashboard. Because, and I'm going to steal a little bit of this from Chuck Swindoll, giving an analogy about driving in a car. And, Jeff, imagine you and I are in a car and, we're going down the road normal, and then you notice that a red light comes on the dash. And it's a red, because I know you're a car guy. It's a red light that has something to do with something pretty major. Mm-hmm. And you go, hey, Eric, I noticed that warning light came on, and that most assuredly means this, and that's pretty big. You wanna go ahead and I go, no, I don't think that's necessary, Jeff. Here, just hold on, and you see me reach down right under my seat, and I got a hammer, and I go boom, boom, boom. Light goes out, and I go, see, Jeff, we're all good. We're only got about 10 more miles on the trip.
Piece of black electrical tape does the same thing.
Yeah, right, exactly. Except I will do that while I'm driving, right? But you see where I'm going. You're going to say, Eric, you can use any hammer or electrical tape you want. The warning is there. Your car is trying to tell you there's a problem. Stop or get that checked out. Or when you get back, put more air in the tire, whatever the case may be. But you can't just, let's face it, we live in an age where a lot of people potentially have just said, well, if I don't look at it, it's not there. Mm-hmm. We're just trying to say to everyone out there, if a warning light comes on, pay attention to it.
And I think you said something that I didn't really say anything about before. You might have to go to your emotional intelligence mechanic. You might have to see someone else to help. Old cars, I can probably fix. New cars, no. Mm-hmm. I don't know enough about these complicated new cars to work on them.
Well, and I think that's a good lead in to the idea about how we know what type of help to get, right? Mm-hmm. It's one thing if the warning light is for low tire pressure. Okay, maybe that's a friend. Mm-hmm. Over a cup of coffee. There's another warning light that may have to do with your low gas. Or I mean, okay, I go to the gas station,
Right.
or I've got, there's all kinds of, and I'm not a car guy again, Jeff, as you know by now. The warning lights, the more grave the light or the messaging behind the light is how you uptick it.
Yeah, if it says you're running out of oil, you better get that looked at.
Yeah.
And
that may be potentially the warning light that says you should see a therapist. Maybe there's a light that's not as grave that says maybe you need to see a counselor, but that could be your priest, your pastor, your whatever, right? And then again, going back to, you got one tire that's low. Well, that's something that probably you can do with a friend. And this is the plug for Spirit of EQ, I think where we fit in, Jeff, is we're the proactive. No, I don't have any warning lights. No warning lights at all. No gauges are off. I just want to get stronger, and I want to be more in tune to what I'm feeling so that I can use that to make better decisions. And yes, maybe the better decisions one day will be, hey, that's a red light that has to do with my oil. And I know what that means because I understand what my emotions were trying to communicate to me about that. And that's you've got so much available to you to take advantage of in order to do that. The important thing is, and you said it, I believe, earlier, you have to pay attention.
Exactly.
You have to pay attention. Wow. All right, Jeff, any other competencies that come to your mind? And I'm only prompting you that way because I just want to make sure that we are giving the full that we can for folks out there.
No, I think that's
yeah, because you covered a lot. I mean, we got consequential thinking,
emotional literacy, patterns,
recognizing empathy. And let's stay there for a minute as we get closer to the end of this episode. Empathy. I know we've talked about it a ton. There's always at times where people will kind of assume that, and I especially see this when we go over the data with folks, the assessment data is, oh my gosh, my empathy level, is low. I scored really low in that, and I'm not very empathetic. Okay, or vice versa, right? Maybe they have a very high level of empathy and they smile because when someone's in trouble, I'm willing to just sit with them, and then I'll ask them, so who sits with you?
Exactly.
So touch a little bit about that self-empathy piece again.
Yeah, a lot of times when I've went over this stuff with people, they've never heard the idea of empathy for themselves, of self-empathy.
Yeah, right.
And that's basically allowing yourself to be human, to acknowledge that, you're not going to be perfect, and there's going to be times when you do have a failure or something that doesn't go to your expectations, and that's okay. And if you have self-empathy, you're not going to be adding the baggage of constantly beating yourself up for something that happened in the past.
Because what does that beating up do to your progress? It hinders it, doesn't it?
I think it stops it. You just can't move ahead with your growth if all you think about is how negative you've been or how bad you've been as far as these kind of things. I don't think you can really move ahead until you can get to the point of acknowledging a failure and then growing from it. One of our partners, Lynette, she always talks about how when you look at where you are in life, you have to remember that everything that has happened to you has gotten you to that point, the good things and the bad things. And you have to look at it as a whole.
Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful. Well, Jeff, as always, enjoy our time together. And for those in the audience, we appreciate you tuning in today. Take care. Hi, everyone. This is Eric Pennington with the Spirit of EQ. I'm not introducing a new episode today. I'm here to tell you some things that might help you. Jeff, you're with me as always. So
yes.
How do people get in touch with us?
Well, the best way is just send us an email at info@spiritofeq.com.
That's awesome. Jeff, I was also thinking about reviews, and I'm notoriously bad at asking for them, so reviews on all of the platforms wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes.
Do you think that'd be good?
I think that would be great because, one, that will help us learn how to make better ones. And it's always good for us
So
to hear.
we're not the perfect podcast hosts?
We're close.
Okay, all right, but
not,
still,
not totally
we want your
perfect.
feedback. We want your feedback.
But it also might let us know a new subject. Hey, we need to dig deeper into that.
Yeah.
So let us know what you think.
Cool. We really appreciate that. As always, too, there is social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and we also have a YouTube channel. Those also have mechanisms or options for you to be able to leave a comment, a like, or those kind of things. Just want to make sure that you know how to get in touch with us. Right, Jeff?
Right. We appreciate you all.
Thank you. Once again, we really appreciate you tuning in today. One of the things that Jeff and I want to bring to your attention as well is that when we created this podcast, it was not intended to take the place of a clinician. In other words, if you find yourself in a place where there's something deeper going on or something that you cannot solve on your own, we do recommend that you reach out to a clinician of some sort. This podcast is purely opinion-based, and it is rooted in the desire to help you along your path in whatever way we can. However, it is never going to replace, nor should it ever be looked at as a replacement for clinical help in any way. Thanks again for tuning in.